Welcome everyone to Chasing Tents. My name is Abby. Thank you very much for joining me, everyone. In this episode, just like I promised last week, I'll be showcasing Mike Edwards, who's a very accomplished racer and also a great tutor. Now, I sent my footage to Mike Edwards and he's going to be doing some online coaching on my Mallory Park day, which was a week ago. So if you haven't seen that track day, it's an amazing day and I made a really good film about it. So after this video, you can watch that. So that was a great day and I was stuck on 1 minute dead. Now Mike, and it's not all about lap times here, it's about the right lines, what I was doing wrong, what I was doing kind of right, and the gearing and all sorts of different things. So Mike, and if anyone doesn't know who Mike is, now let me tell you something. I've had kind of on-track coaching and off-track coaching by a few people. Some people are great racers or great ex-racers, but that sometimes doesn't translate to them being a great teacher. Now, some people have got this natural ability to teach well, whether it's online or face-to-face. And Mike not only has got a lot of experience at that particular track, so it's a great kind of teacher in that aspect. Also, on the other side, he has been coaching for a very long time to all sorts of people from all different, I would say, racing backgrounds or kind of amateur levels or intermediate levels or fast levels or racers. So I'm going to be showcasing everything in detail. Now, if a lot of people don't know who Mike is, Mike's won a number of championships, whether it's historic or, he's taken part in a lot of 400cc championships and 600cc championships. I'll show you some footage now where he's on pole position on the 600cc race.
On pole position for the 23-lap race, Mike Edwards.
And now I'm going to show you the footage where he's number 2 at the 600cc race.
Look at this front row. Mara, Edwards, Whitby, the veteran's veteran, alongside 16-year-old Jamie Toseland.
And also, he knows when things go wrong, so he can teach me the right thing. So here is Mike having a massive high side at Mallory Park.
Lottery. Oh, get off that bike. That is a big get off there. So rolling over and over in the track. Deary me, at the S's.
Mike Edwards.
Mike Edwards takes a big tumble. Gets on the power through the right-hander. Yes, they've red flagged it, and absolutely Mallory Park. Oh, dearie me. That is one of the biggest high sides you're likely to see. The rear wheel sunk right up. Oh, look at that. Well, number 57 there, Steve Plater, in all sorts of trouble, steps on Edwards' bike as Edwards rolls to a stop. Mike Edwards is in the medical centre. We don't expect to see him back for the restart of this race, that's for sure.
So from those 3 footage, not only we can see that Mike's, been at the top at Mallory Park, but also he knows when things go wrong, what not to do. So, you don't really, get into a high side situation or lose the front and stuff like that. So there's 1 or 2 things I want to mention. It's going to be a long video, so please, I would be so grateful if you can watch it till the end. If you've got interest in Mallory Park, definitely. If you're not, if you're never going to go there, what's the point watching this video? But it's great to see how he coaches people. So even if you are going to do Donington Park or any other track, it's going to be a kind of a great insight on his kind of constructive feedback. Now, 1 or 2 things Mike has said in the video at the start is that he cannot see my rev counter. And Mike, if you're watching, I couldn't see my rev counter as well. Basically, I've got an i2M dash and I turned my bike on, ignition on, while it was on charge, and the screen went a bit funny. So that particular day, I couldn't really see my rev counter. I was going by the lights, and Mike was right. On the lights, if the lights go to the end, it's about 13,500 RPM. And on the other side, Mike was absolutely spot on the gearing. So just before this track, I did Silverstone. So my bike was a bit long geared for Silverstone. So Mike was very good at spotting that it wasn't as suitable for Mallory Park, but I just didn't bother to change the gearing just to come to Mallory Park. So guys, I don't want to talk too long. Here you go. Enjoy this footage and till the end, and hope you learned something from it. And I just want to thank Mike for doing this. And it's just been brilliant to really learn it. So I'm going to go to Mallory Park very soon, and I'm going to apply all those things what Mike has taught in this video.
Hi Abby, thanks very much for sending your video through of you enjoying yourself clearly at Mallory Park. Something I've not been to Mallory for quite a while. I must get there again and reimburse myself with the whole experience. However, I've made quite a few notes on what you've been up to. There's a couple of things stick in my mind straight away. The gearing on the bike, it sounds like it's quite tall, like it's maybe either stock gearing or you've been to somewhere like Silverstone or something like that where you need quite long, tall gearing. And for this circuit, it's you're only using the first three gears properly and fourth for a quick squirt on the down the start finish straight. It'd be interesting to sort of try gearing the bike slightly different, but there's a couple of issues about revs, and we'll talk to that at the various points around the circuit. Also, I can't actually see on the video your tacho. I can see the change-up lights, and I'm assuming it's 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm assuming 5, possibly 6 is that's all it gets to. It does sound like you are revving it quite high when you do get it going down the straight, but I can't actually physically see what RPM you're doing at the time. It's handy for me sometimes to see that, because I match that RPM with the sound and the tone of the bike, and that gives me more of an idea sometimes on what your position of your throttle hand, i.e. have you got the gas fully open. Because increasingly what I'm finding with riders nowadays is if you're riding, this is an Aprilia RSV4 I'm assuming, and that's going to be a bike putting out thick under 200 horsepower, probably about 190 plus horsepower, and for a lot of people that's an awful lot of horsepower to try and use. So what they tend to do is ride around using the RPM range of the bike, but not actually maximising that revs and power, because they haven't actually got the throttle fully open. And that makes an enormous difference. Even if you're opening it maybe up to 3/4, the bike will still be charging, still will be motoring down the straights and out of the corners, but it's not 190 horsepower. You're down to sort of 150 horsepower, which is frankly quite a lot. But if you're talking about losing tenths of seconds round a track, you can't afford to give away brake horsepower, because it's the easiest way to sort of gain back time is being able to sort of really nail the bike out of corners and have the confidence to maximise that use of power. For instance, your line round the circuit generally is pretty good. You're more or less in the right place at the right time. Again, we can tweak that. Excuse me. I'm gonna sneeze. Yeah, we can tweak that, as I say. But you've got to try and imagine the length of the circuit. Imagine if your bike's the tyres on your bike are leaving like a paint trail, so that's leaving like a line of what you're creating, your racing line around the circuit. You can't actually alter that in its length. The only thing you can alter about that line as such is the amount of time you spend on it, to reduce the timeline, to reduce your overall lap time of the circuit. Unless you start missing out Edwinas and going through the chicanes without sort of going through them as such, that's the only way you can shorten the time if you cheat. But if you stay on the racing line, it's about maximising what the bike is capable of and what you're capable of. Now, to a certain extent, that's about corner speed, and Gerard's represents probably, I've never actually measured it, but it probably represents over a quarter of the length of the circuit, just the one corner. So it's quite important, not only the entry all the way around Gerard's and the exit, to maximise the use of that particular corner. So that obviously includes angle of lean and actual corner speed. But one of the biggest lumps of time people lose is on deceleration into corners, i.e. braking. They protract out the braking, they sort of tend to brake maybe a bit early, not as hard as they potentially could do, or they don't trail the brake into the corner long enough, so that means all of the braking tends to be out of the corner, so at the tip in they've more or less slowed down by that point. And Gerard's is a great example of maximising that trail braking capability, which we all have. We've just got to learn how to do it and get confident in doing it. And what that does is it allows us to basically leave the braking point much later towards the corner, so we're driving on full throttle for longer, so straight away we're shaving time off, but we'll still be able to control our entry into the corner. right to sort of full lean, because fairly quickly going into Gerrard's the bike is at pretty much full lean. Obviously you can't brake seriously hard at full lean, but all the way going into that point, all the way till the bike's more or less sort of 3/4 to full lean, you can have some form of braking on at that point. And certainly decelerating just by using the closed throttle deeper into the corner allows you to sort of have the confidence to push that potential into the corner. And the same coming out of the corners. Most of the modern superbikes have pretty good traction control systems and anti-slide and slide control and all that sort of stuff. So it's about finding a setting in the bike which gives you the confidence to really utilise that power, not just the revs, but utilise the real power of the bike coming out. And Gerrard's again is one of those corners where it's all about sort of continuing your pace round the corner, yet have some sort of a delivery when you come out onto the short straight down towards Edwina's. They put Edwina's in a few years ago now. It used to be much further on down to the S's, and to be honest I preferred that circuit, but hey, you've got to ride what the circuit is underneath you, haven't you? Either way, we're going to start the lap, obviously going out of the elbow, which is behind us. I've chosen this lap, which is starting on, I'll give you the video name in a second, but it starts at 1:10 on your time frame. You sent us quite a long file, and there was quite a few laps on that where you sounded like you were having some dreadful problems with the gearbox. So I kind of dropped that session, favoured this one. Your times were pretty consistent, so I don't think there was a lot lost. And on this particular lap we've used, we get quite a good clear lap, so I can see what you're about, not you chasing riders down or being balked by riders or whatever. So for me it's a nice clean lap to use. Okay, off we're down to turn 1, Gerrard's. There's not a lot really to talk about going down the straight, so at this point as you come out of the elbow, you can potentially use a little bit more of the track, and it's about confidence there, really, about allowing the bike to run right out to the curb. It's a bit scary because you're dropping down the hill and the bike's quite light on its feet, slipping about. But either way, there's not a great deal to talk about on the run down there. What we should be looking for now is, even at this point on the track, is progressively making our way over to the left hand side, ready for hitting the brakes down into Gerrard's. So let's get ourselves down there. Right, I've watched quite a few of your laps now, and the one thing in your riding which is good is when you've got a clear lap and you're not being hassled by people or people under your feet, you're relatively consistent, which is really important. Consistency is, without consistency it's virtually impossible to develop as a rider, because if you're inconsistent you won't know what and when to change what you're changing. It's all like sort of kind of knitting fog. It just doesn't make any sense. But as you start to become more consistent and rhythmical about how you're doing things, you realise then how easy things are or how hard things are. Generally, once you've got the line of a circuit sorted out, a good way to know if you're going fast enough is to find out how easy it is to stay on your chosen line. If it's easy to stay on that line, there's probably more pace in, you put pace into the corner, for argument's sake. If you're struggling to make the line, you might be finding that's the sort of the limit of what you're capable of. Either way, your braking generally is just after you've gone under the bridge. You see the service road on the left here, a little gravel road. That's roughly where you're braking, and you're still making your way out to the left hand side of the track, so there's no problem there at all. I feel this is a little bit early, and I come to that assumption largely because after you've broke, you tip in just after the pit lane and exit, but almost straight away the bike starts to go to the right. There's a marshal's hut on the left hand side here. That marshal's hut. Almost straight away after that is where you've clearly stopped braking and you've sort of picked the throttle up. So basically all your deceleration is done almost before the actual what I would call corner entry. We're still sort of finishing the straight, as it were, before corner entry. And there used to be, they've resurfaced it a few years ago now, since I've been there. There used to be a series of ripples, more or less, if you can see that guy in front of you there, more or less at that point there used to be a series of like little ripples, because the cars going into the corner had sort of pushed the tarmac a little bit and created a few little ripples. I enjoyed them there. It made it a bit exciting because the bike could get a bit active going over them, but it was an absolute perfect point to sort of finally, at that point, finally let the brakes go. So I would be effectively trail braking all the way into that point, which would allow me to sort of keep going much closer to the corner, so I could potentially get right past people or get right alongside people and still be able to control my entry into the corner. Having the confidence to push yourself here is of a tremendous benefit, particularly because of the length and the duration of the corner. You can continue that sort of the speed that you've put into the corner, you can continue it round the corner. Either way, let's just back up a second. We're already now on a what I would call a maintenance throttle. Now I feel there's more potential to be had here. Generally speaking, I'm saying people, there will be really fast riders who will still be decelerating here and sort of letting the bike sort itself out. And sort of by now they'll be kind of almost finishing the brakes and sort of going to a closed throttle just to sort of get that last little bit of a feel of how much grip you've got left. Ron Haslam was telling us many years ago now, when I was learning how to ride superbikes, and I says to Ron, I says, how do you know how much grip you've got left in the tyre, you know, where the limit is? And he says, we were actually racing at Mallory, he was on the JPS Norton, I was on a Yamaha, and he said to us, he says, look, he says, pick a corner something like Gerrard's is a perfect corner to try it. And he says, go into Gerrard's at a very fast pace, maybe slightly slower than your maximum pace, and induce a slide. That means don't countersteer, but oversteer the bike to induce a slide, and then see how easy it was to recover. And if it's easy to recover, you've got plenty of grip left. He was sort of right. It was an extreme way of saying, don't almost crash, but don't crash, and then control how much sort of the last little bit you've got. I just tended to crash there generally because I was learning about slicks and learning about pushing the bike at that point. But it's all about that heavy braking to start with as you go after the bridge, but as you sort of almost as you start to tip into the corner, heavy braking, and then keep that brake on for quite a long while, and then start to trail the brake off and be kind of long duration of a sort of steady release to a point where eventually you've let the brake go. And then let the bike sort of settle, and then pick the throttle up to your maintenance throttle. And I think all of that can be kind of pushed deeper into this corner. Either way, your line round here is great. You're right up against the non-curb, or the right hand side of the track here. It always amazes me there's no inside curb here, but I suppose they ran out of money because it's a hell of a long curb. But either way, you hold a pretty good line to start off with. You do drift out slightly in the track. We've just passed the Marshall's post on the right hand side, which is about 2/3 of the way round. It's not quite half, and by that point I tend to drift out into the middle of the track. The corner that has such a massive radius, you're never going to be able to square off the corner. That means create an early apex, drift out in the track, and then come back for the second apex. We all try and do it. We try and open the corner out as much as we can by drifting out to about halfway out in the track. Now you can afford to drift out a bit more, but in all honesty there's not that much difference in it because of the sheer length of the radius. What you should be trying here at this point is exploring basically how much lean angle you've got left. Now you can control that lean angle partly by leaning your body out more to get, if you find out your sort of toes are on the floor and you start to run out and get close to your limit of ground clearance, you can kind of push the bike away a little bit and get off the bike a bit more and give you a few degrees of lean more, and use that as a kind of a safety zone as such. but it's literally about from the point that you pick the throttle up after the bike settles after your deceleration into the corner. From that point on, it's all about sort of basically opening the throttle, or that maintenance throttle. It should be on the upper side of maintenance as opposed to decelerating. Basically what I'm saying there is try and build up as much pace as you can till eventually you either start to run offline and you can't get it back, or you start to run out of ground clearance. Now that's generally speaking where the limit is, and that is all basically all the way around the corner. Now what we're actually looking for at this point, if we go to the let's just go to the overhead map at this point. Oops, get my mouse working again. There we go. As you can see here, this is Gerard's looking from an aerial shot, and this section of the track here is where they put a chicane in on the exit of Gerard's should I say, to basically slow the superbikes down, because the barrier on the exit of the circuit here, on the exit of the corner, is a bit on the close side, and it was put in as a safety feature. The irony was it made it even more dangerous because people were high siding coming out onto the straight, where before they kind of just have a slide off. It was a high speed slide, but it was, Jamie Whitten once said, I'd rather lose the front at 120 than high side at 50, and he's got a point. So there's your marshal's post here. Let's get a bit of a line marker up here. So as we pass the marshal's post, the halfway point of the corner is about there, just after the marshal's post, so more or less in the middle of the track there. And what I would suggest to start to look for, the first thing you see is this short curb here, but that really, it pops into view almost as you're passing it. It's easier to actually see this part of the track as you're rounding the corner, because it's just physically easier to see. And as you start to see that part of the track, the part of the chicane, basically start to make your way in towards the left hand side of the track, and your line here is particularly good. As you pass the exit of the chicane, there's that little small curb there, you're almost up against the curb there. So from a line perspective, brilliant. And what that does, having that, making that sort of second apex, if you will, effectively gives you so much more of the track to use to drift out into at the exit onto the straight. If you miss that apex and you sort of, say, going round the outside of somebody at that point, you need to be careful, because the normal run out that you have isn't there anymore. You've already used some of it by rounding that rider. So if you are ever running around the outside of somebody there, always picture how much track that you've used to run round that guy, and take that off what you've got out to your left. Because it's all too easy to end up running wide, and if you do what you normally do, plus overtake that guy, you'll possibly end up on the grass. So that's just a little bit of warning. What I would also suggest to try here, and it's got to be worth a try, I think you never go faster if you don't try things, is to listening to your bike. It's quite high up the rev range as we run round this corner. Let's get a little bit further round. And you can tell as you're sort of passing the exit of the chicane here, listening to the engine note, you're kind of building, you're kind of getting ready for that punch out onto the straight, which is fair comment. But it sounds quite high up in the rev range. That's why I'm frustrated, because I can't see what it's actually revving to. Now what I've found here, because the bike's at quite a big angle of lean, theoretically it should be pretty much at almost full lean at this point, because that means you're maximising the corner speed. I'm not having a good day. As we pass the exit of the chicane here, what I would suggest is, because it's high up in the rev range and the bike's at pretty much full lean, you can't really utilise all the power of what the bike's got. And because it's that high up in the rev range and you're at sort of, I don't know, maybe a quarter to half throttle, it's hard work psychologically to wind that throttle on and punch the bike onto the straight. And because it's so high up in the rev range, there's not that much revs left to actually punch the bike out onto the straight. So what I would suggest here is to actually try being in a slightly higher gear. i.e. third, try fourth. Now that'll drop the revs down, obviously. Sorry, having a moment. That'll drop the revs down a little bit, and it may feel like the bike is a little more sluggish onto the straight. The upside to that is because it's lost a few revs, the bike will feel better on the throttle. It'll give you more confidence to get that throttle back to the stop earlier and harder. And the difference, ignoring the RPM, the bike will actually probably be more effectively more powerful onto the straight, even though it'll sound a little more dull because it's down the rev range. I've tried it different ways, and a bike always sounds like it's going really well when it's right up the rev range, but if you're not on the stop, the throttle stop, then revs don't really count anymore. What you're better off is having the control and the confidence to use more throttle with maybe less revs than loads of revs and be tickling the throttle, because revs aren't power. Revs are only power when you've got the throttle on the stop. I hope you can see where I'm coming from with that one. Either way, pretty good drive onto the straight, and there's a short sort of punch your throttle which takes us down to Edwinas. Now Edwinas is one of those awkward little chicanes. The track kind of narrows down slightly as you go through it. The right is slightly tighter than the left going in, and it's a chicane always at the end of the day is a compromise. Even if the two corners, the left and the right, or the right and the left, whichever way it goes, even if they're identical in radius, you can sort of be fast in and slow out, or slow in and fast out, or average in and average out. It really depends on what works best for the chicane. And tactically, that's obviously a difference. If you're catching somebody, you might be better off hanging back so you're slowing into the chicane, but they're going defensive, so they've gone in fast. That means they're going to exit slow, and because you've gone in slow, you can exit fast, so that the potential is then, instead of trying to pass them going into the chicane, you actually outdrive them coming out because they've gone all defensive. But that's more of a tactical decision rather than the best sort of racing line. Now what it looks like you do here, you do a pretty good job of the braking, but for my money is you sort of start to tip in, I think, a little bit too early, so you create quite a big radius into the corner. And what that does in turn is it gets you into the corner reasonably quick, but you've used up quite a bit of the track to the right, so naturally now you're going to tighten up your exit, so it slows the exit right-handed onto the short straight down towards the S's. So you're into that sort of compromise situation. Second thing about chicanes is what restricts a lot of people's actual speed through the chicane is how fast they feel comfortable changing direction, which is, when we get to it, super important at the bus stop. But coming through here, your direct speed of direction changed is controlled partly by you've gone, for my money, slightly out of position to the right going through the left, which tightens the left up. Tightens the right up, tightens your exit up. One of the things which is interesting there, because of your gearing, I'm just listening to the bike, again I can't see the RPM, is how low down the rev range is. You've come out of Gerard's in third gear and stayed in third gear to get you down to Edwina's, which is kind of fair comment. But you've only gone down one gear, and that sort of means that because of the quite a lot of speed that you've lost going through the chicane, it means the bike's sort of fairly dull coming out. Now I know the thousands are quite, the V4s particularly are quite grunty coming out the corners, but you really got to try and maximise this punch out, because effectively you're coming onto a straight and you really want to get on it, sort of thing. So I'm suggesting maybe a change of gearing, so that fourth gear would be a better gear out of Gerard's, and that would allow you to use second gear better here, or try first. Now the point that you go down into first is the important thing. Because it'll be a little more revvy going sort of into and through the chicane, you might find that that the last shift from second into first might have to happen literally as you're going into the corner. So the timing of that is going to be quite critical. And also, it depends on if you're running race shift or road shift. Sometimes it can be a little tricky getting your toe under the gear lever to lift it up if you're running race shift going into the corner. And sometimes it's easier if you're running road shift going into a corner like that, because you just dab it down, and if your toe stubs the floor, it's not the end of the world. But either way, it does sound like you're fairly low down the rev range. Then when we come out of the corner, you do, for my money, the absolute cardinal sin of, even though that while the bike's low in the rev range and starting to build up and get going, is you then short shift. I know what you're planning. You're planning to be in the right gear to go through the S's and take you down to the hairpin. But the one thing you try never to do in this scenario where you're coming onto a straight is short shift. The whole idea of short shifting is to get into a suitable gear, because you can't utilise the gear that you're in at that point in time. And there's various examples you can come up with that. But in this case, I think if you listen to the bike's building up, and even before it's really got going, you shift up another gear. And even though you're relatively consistent, in one of the other sessions I was looking at, a guy, I think he was a no limits instructor, comes hurling past you between the exit of the chicane there and going into the S's, which kind of highlights, even though you're kind of driving quite hard, because if you're lower down the rev range, plus you've done the upshift a bit on the early side, and the instructor's probably maximised his acceleration, he comes bailing past you. You're actually going round into the S's, your speed difference isn't that great, but it's because you didn't maximise your acceleration out of the corner. That's why the instructor came past you what looks like so quickly. So let's have a listen. Yeah, there's no sort of real sort of punch out there. Potentially that you potentially should be upshifting maybe slightly later, and this is why you might not want to do that going into a corner, and maybe that's why you're doing the upshift here. I just feel that there's something being lost there, that the acceleration potential. It's almost like you've gone through the chicane in the wrong gear and then not made up for it coming out. But either way, going through the S's, I think you do a pretty good job. Your line's pretty good. You go into the right of the S's arguably fractionally early. It's not the end of the world. You make the apex, which is just the end of the curb there, which you spot on. Good change of direction. As I can tell by the bike being a bit light on its feet there that you're driving through the corner, which is really important to try and keep that acceleration going through the corner. And the bike will be light on its feet there because there's effectively a camber change, and that's what you're feeling as you go over that sort of wobbliness, as it were. And then a good line through here on down towards the hairpin, and you do use quite a lot of the track out to the right. Again, that freaks a lot of people out. There used to be a big tree. I don't know whether you ever remember it or have ever seen it. There used to be, where's me thing, he's gone. Just about here, there was a great big tree, and it used to freak everybody out because the circuit, the barriers used to sort of butt out to go round, and it always had like a magnet towards it as if you were going to hit it, sort of thing. But they've taken that down now. If you're a tree hugger, you'd be in misery, but there you go. But either way, utilising the track there is good, and your aim point now is up over to the left hand side of the track down to the hairpin. Now this is a point of contention really, the hairpin scenario. You drive down there, again is pretty good. You drive really hard. Quite how much throttle you've got there, the 1000s should be desperately trying to wheel it at this point, because there's two sort of humps in the track which indicate roughly the point where you start to kind of roll off and start to brake, and because you've got to control the bike, gets a little agitated on the brakes because of the humps. It just kind of unsettles the bike. It's part of the circuit, and it would be a terrible circuit if they took the bumps out, because it's part of it. Either way, you get slightly shimmying on the brakes there, which shows me that you're at maximum braking potential there. Now your position in the track is sort of perfect in many ways now to create what I would call a tight apex. Now let's go quickly to the other share, which should be the circuit. Oops. Clear me pen. And let's get ourselves round to the hairpin. There we come. Down to the hairpin. And let's zoom in a little bit. So this is the hairpin. So as you can tell by the hairpin, the exit is widened quite dramatically, and that was done largely for the cars, to be fair, because the cars like to sort of sweep round the corner. You've essentially come in right over on essentially the left hand side of the track. Now the potential here is ultimately we've got to get into the bus stop here, so that is the first part of the bus stop, which is that little curve which jumps out on the left. Now if you were riding in like an old style 125 or the 252 strokes, which didn't have good pickup out the corners, they tended to sort of do a big arc round the corner like that, so they could keep up some sort of momentum going around the corner. Like the Moto 3 bikes around here will do a similar thing to that, where they will use a bigger arc so they can keep up some sort of momentum around the corner. Because you're on a superbike, the potential is you've got so much more grumps, so you could do it. I suggest hang on to the brake a bit longer and do a much tighter turn, so you can exit the corner much more over to the effectively the right hand side of the track at the exit. Now to do that, what it looks like here is you're effectively, whether you've either broke a little bit late or you've not hung on to the brakes and had the confidence to keep the brakes on as the bike's going into the hairpin. Now I would really suggest walk the circuits if you ever get the chance, because what you don't really see until you actually walk the circuit is how steeply cambered this hairpin is. It's got an incredible camber, and the advantage to that is that you can brake so deep into the corner. You can brake really hard almost to the apex of the corner, because the camber's kind of helping you all the time into the corner. You obviously need to release as you get to the apex of the corner and be trailing off right at that last little bit, but I just think that you could potentially hang on to that brake a little bit longer and be a bit more confident in the turning, and that would allow you to get to that point in the track. But because you drift out quite a long way out in the track and you do it fairly regularly, essentially that gives you a reasonable corner speed, but the problem is with that is it puts you completely out of position for your entry into the chicane. Now from the right hand side of the track at the hairpin, that gives you virtually a straight line approach, where here you've got from the left hand side of the track, you've effectively got to go around the left hand bend just to get to your entry. So even though you carry better speed going around that way, because of the protracted curve that you've got to get to into the chicane itself, into the bus stop itself, where if you kill an extra bit of speed, get the thing spun round and then focus on the hard drive out and punch the bike straight to that point, generally speaking that's the way I would tend to do it. It is a little bit bike specific, and again if you're riding a low capacity bike with not a lot of power, or a two-stroke which hasn't got a great amount of torque, you tend to need to keep that sort of momentum, which is that longer run round the corner. So it's worth having that in the back of your mind anyway. So back to us here. Let's get us into the corner. You just about make the apex, but as you can see how far out in the track we've utilised virtually all of the track, bar probably about 10 feet to the left. That bulbous bit which you see out to the right was put on there because a lot of people were running wide and running on the grass, so they eventually kept tarmacking it and people were taking more and more advantage of it. If it was the old circuit, you'd effectively now be on the grass, because that shows you how much of the track that you've actually utilised in that turn. Reasonable drive out. You're obviously in first gear, it's the only gear that you use around there, to be fair. And then the run up to the chicane. Now The bus stop was an addition to slow riders down, going round the old through Devil's Elbow and drop onto the straight. I remember days when it used to be like that in black and white days, and it was very, very exciting. On a modern bike, it would be extremely bloody dangerous. That's one of the reasons why the chicane's in there, is to slow the pace down. But because they did it on a budget, and they only had so much ground that they could physically use, it's like a little dent in the track, which means that between the left apex, the right apex, and the left exit apex, there isn't that much difference in distance, should I say. It's not dissimilar to the chicane they put in at Cadwell Park, just before the bottom of the mountain. Very compact. And effectively what you need to do there is really speed up your change of direction. That means as you go into the corner left, flick right, flick left. And what I found the best thing to do there isn't to stay sat in the bike so much. Is from as you're entering this corner, is kind of hold your weight up slightly on your pegs, so that you're carrying the weight up on the pegs, so you're not sort of, your bum isn't too flat in the seat. And that allows you to sort of move around much faster on the bike. Basically counter steering and putting weight through the pegs, so the bike you basically imagine like riding a horse and you're up on stirrups. You're kind of flicking it about underneath you, and that speed of direction change is something that you have to do, because this lap and other laps going through there, you've got to remember the slow point of the corner is the right. Is that right where we are now? This is the slow point of the corner. And if you try and go too fast through here, and your rate of direction change isn't quick enough, you do exactly what you do here, because you don't open the throttle in here. You get to this point in the track before you open the throttle. So you're decelerating past the slow point, right to the point of the exit of the corner. If you can have a go at changing your direction quicker, there's sort of nothing wrong with your speed, but between your left and your right here, that direction change needs to be slightly later and slightly faster. Because you're doing it at a certain pace, you're travelling at a certain speed, you're using up the speed, using up the distance, because of your rate of direction is slower, which means you get to the apex of the right, and essentially we're now pointed over there, where I'd like at this point in the track to be pointed much more that way, which means if we are pointed more to the right now, we can then start accelerating, and as the bike comes upright, flick it left. So it's much more flick it right, flick it left. And if speeding that rate of change of direction up is the key to getting through the chicane. You can't just sit in the saddle and kind of move around. You've got to really weight the pegs up and push the bars, really be overactive. Now when you're practicing doing that, when you change the direction too quickly and you've not adjusted your speed through the corner, you can end up sort of tipping in too early. And you might think, oh, that's a mistake. Well, think about it from another perspective. The rate of change might be too fast, only because you're travelling too slowly. Because the two speeds, your rate of direction change and the speed through the corner, and the point that you do it, all need to marry up. And because you've got 3 points, you've got the left, you've got the right, and immediately you've got the left, all in such a short space of time, it's all about timing and speeding that timing up. There's only so fast physically you can go through the corner, but that's restricted if your rate of change of direction isn't speeded up as well. I hope that makes sense. It does to me. Anyway, let's get us out of there. Because you didn't do that rate of direction change very quickly, it's not until we get to this point in the track that we've started acceleration. We should have started accelerating behind us, and that will allow the bike to punch out into the track a bit more. To be fair, from this point onwards, I think you do a pretty good job. But in first, you do a reasonable drive, you short shift into second, and fairly quickly into third. Now that double short shift, I think is something that it works well around this particular corner because of the camber's dropping away, the corner's kind of opening out, and you can't utilise all of the power of the bike all the way around the corner. And that's one of the benefits of getting the pace out of the corner from the right-hander. Well, let's get to it from here. If we can sort of punch the bike and really accelerate hard, right to about where that guy is in front of us there, he's just gone past the left and is probably on his way to the middle of the track, out towards the left. All that's like a first gear driving really hard to that point. Now, because essentially you're only driving from that point to where he is, that restricts how fast you're going to be travelling at that point. Where if we can start our acceleration here, we've got that bit of extra acceleration plus our acceleration to where he is, and you add that up, and that gives you more combined speed to run down the hill. And that's where the short shift into second and straight into third, and then continue your drive down the hill, will really start to pay off. The big mistake a lot of people make here is to, particularly on a big powerful bike, is to kind of think the corner is one radius, and it really isn't. You've got to try and make it one radius. Now, there's two distinct bumps in the effectively apexes. One is almost straight away, and we can see that here, there, and the second one is quite a long way down the hill here, this one here, and I wouldn't worry too much about even attempting to make that. You should be much further out in the track. I think the ultimate line here, and walking the circuit really helps. If you hug the inside line dropping down the hill here, certainly up to and past the first apex, the camber's almost negative. What you need to stand here is when it's absolutely pouring down and watch where the rain runs, and the rain tends to run down the hill, but it runs sort of in the middle of the track, and then as it gets towards the bottom it kind of turns right, and that shows you where the cambers of things are going. Because if the camber was going left at the apex, it would run into the apex, but it doesn't. It kind of runs into the middle of the track. So that shows you where the sort of the track hasn't got a normal camber as we think of it, like a hump. It's actually almost convex, which means that the inside of the corner, if you've got less of a camber than you have in the middle. So your line round here on the exit of this corner is generally pretty good. You've just got to get the bike to punch out of the bus stop a little bit more, and that's all about that rapid change of direction. You do the change up into third, and then drive down the hill. And to be honest, here running down on there, it's having a good setting on the bike for your traction control and your slide control there. And if you're finding the bike's not moving around that much, and you've got the bike pretty much wound on, and I'm not sure on the Aprilia how that displays what sort of traction you're putting out there. On my BM, for instance, you've got an ABS light, and you've got basically a slide control showing you how much you're actually using. And essentially, if you're not using much and you've got the throttle open, you need to wind your traction off a little bit to get more actually power through down to the ground. And the bike should always feel like it's sort of what I've described as walking, as that kind of sliding, gripping, sliding, gripping, sliding, gripping, almost weaving sort of situation. And that's then maximising what you can do onto the straight. And then basically it's down to Gerard's again, down to start lap 2. So I hope I've given you something to think about there, and some food for thought. Summarising, basically, line is pretty good. You've got to maximise what you're doing on that racing line. Try to get your corner entry a little bit better into Gerard's. You maximise the acceleration out of Edwina's. That might need a gearing change or have an experiment of using first gear. But keep your speed up. Don't slow down to almost suit the gear. You know, you need to go slightly faster through the corner anyway, but the revs are right down on the exit. Don't do the short shift coming out on the straight down to the chicane, the S's. And when you run into the hairpin, hang on to that brake a little bit longer to do a slightly tighter line, so your exit out of the hairpin is slightly more to the right, and that gives you more of a punchy straight line into the chicane. which will actually help your direction change anyway, because you've done half of the left turn anyway before you get there. Let us know what you think, and good luck, and keep us up to date with your future plans and how you get on. Okay, Abby, thanks very much.
Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I was very detailed. It was corner by corner. So Mike was absolutely spot on a lot of things where I kind of shifted early, or where I'm actually, the places where he said I'm actually quite good at, he was right, because I was very confident in those places. And there were certain places where I knew, like entering Gerald's, I knew I could carry more speed in. But I hadn't been to that track for about 3.5 years. And I think when the first time I went there was 2017, and I did a 1:06. Or a 1:05, I don't remember. But then this was my second ever time at that racetrack, and I was happy with the 1 minute dead. But what really bothered me, that I wasn't really going anywhere with it. I was just stuck on that 1 minute, and see if I could get some proper advice and take it from there. So it's all about now. So what I'm not just going to sit, with this advice and not do anything about it, and not book Mallory Park for another year, 2 years, or 3 years. I'm going there very soon, and I'm going to apply all these things at that track, and then I'm going to make another video to tell you guys how I applied those things and if they actually worked. So thank you guys for watching this video. Thanks Mike for everything you've done. And guys, if you want to watch stuff like this and also more about motorbikes in general, please do like and subscribe. When you like a video, it just promotes the video to other people who are like-minded, like bikers. And if you subscribe, then you get notification of my other videos, so I don't have to then keep posting my videos to many forums. So if you get notification, then you can watch it that way. Anyways guys, look after yourself, take care, and keep safe.